Lee Chambers is joining me on the podcast today. He's the founder and CEO of Male Allies UK and joining me to look at what allyship looks like in action, not just intention. We're looking at how we move beyond performative DEI into shared accountability and the role of men in shaping a more gender equal future of work. We want to look at how community and collaboration actually accelerate change, but keep coming back to the fact that we are not just talking about allyship. We are actively building it in a way that feels real, practical, and deeply human. Welcome to Hard at Work with me, Trina Sunday. This space is for HR leaders who care deeply about performance and equally deeply about people. For more than 25 years, I've been asking one persistent question. What are the real conditions for happiness at work? Because when humans come first, something deeper shifts. How people show up, how leaders decide, and how work feels. Here, we explore what it really takes to lead with courage, compassion, and clarity, and we pull up a chair to the conversations HR leaders don't always get to have. There's heart here, but there's also depth. If you're ready to build workplaces where people and performance thrive side by side, you're in the right place. Let's get to the heart of it. I'm super excited today to be joined by Lee Chambers. He's the CEO and founder of Male Allies UK, and he's had a pretty diverse career, starting in finance, tech company, but is now spending most of his time focused on including men and engaging men in the conversation on inclusion and promoting effective allyship. He's recognised as a global expert on gender equality, allyship, and masculinity, and it seems like a very timely conversation to be having in the world right now. Welcome to Hard at Work, Lee.
It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today.
I'm really keen. I've done quite a bit of work in this space. So I work with organisations, HR teams. I do a lot of work around gender equity in my pro bono world, especially for women and girls. So all of my work in Cambodia, work I've done abroad, here in Australia, all about trying to level the playing field. I love that you come at this from the male perspective because I feel like there's too many women in this space and in this conversation. But I don't know many people that do this work and that choose to show up in this work that don't kind of have a story or a reason. It's not something that you go, I'm dreaming of being a DEI professional or something like that. Can you tell us a little bit around kind of what's led you to do the work that you do now?
Yeah, so I suppose everyone has a story, and it's that fact that actually got me into this work, but not necessarily my own story. So I'll share a little bit around how that makes sense. So I've always, ever since I was young, had a bit of a pillar of social justice within me. I was that child who, if I saw another child being treated badly, I would go and seek some form of retribution, take the toy back off the child who had it stolen off them and give it back to the child who had it in the first place, but was probably caught doing so in the process. I was ever curious, occasionally got into trouble, but my journey into this work, to be honest, was a journey in itself. I went to university, dropped out, struggled with some mental health issues, and started to build a little bit more self-awareness through that adversity. Went back to university and graduated, but then got made redundant from the finance job that I had, which again made me take a step back and reflect on how other people were navigating that and the luck that I had that I was just at the start of my career. I lost a little bit of that vision on building the tech business in a world where trying to scale and KPIs and money and the endless pursuit of becoming a young leader and thinking you're quite inclusive, but realizing that you're not, kind of pulled me away from my values a bit. But what really kind of brought me back into focus was 12 years ago, I lost the ability to walk after my immune system failed. And learning to walk again, firstly, it makes you realize everything you've taken for granted, makes you realize what actually matters and what really doesn't. It also makes you a lot more humble because you spend a lot of time asking for basic things to be done for you. And when you learn to walk again, you fall over a lot. So picking yourself back up off that floor gives you a level of humility in ways that other adversities might not. But probably the biggest factor was, for me, that was a very challenging period. I had a support network. I felt massively grateful for that. But I didn't get the time with my young children who were, my daughter was born when I was in walking rehab. My son was only 18 months when I got ill. So I didn't have the time with them that I wanted. So I decided to step out of my business to become a stay-at-home father. So what then was a freshly 3-year-old and 1-year-old. And oh boy, did I feel the mental load hit me like a brick to the face. All of a sudden, the reality of, oh wow, I've led a company, but this is something else.
Yeah.
The reflection that it was the most effective leadership and development training course I've ever been on. Built a set of caregiving skills that I never really even knew that I had, but also found out how broken the UK's caregiving system was. And the very seed of this work started Trina because I needed a bit of respite. I needed some adults to talk to. I needed a brew. So I went to my local baby and toddler group. I walked in and looked around the room, and it was me and 37 mothers and grandmothers.
Mm.
In that discomfort, I just went and sat down and started to listen. Wasn't long before I realised that every single woman in that room, mother and grandmother, had a story and things that I heard that I didn't have a lot of perspective on, that I'd not really considered, but that I felt were unjust, unfair, and simply not right. And at that point, I thought, I need to do something, but I don't know what it is. And 11 years ago, that's how this very journey started.
It's so incredible. I think it's one of those things where if, as someone that does build and design and deliver leadership development training, I think if stay at home dad training was kind of a thing, I think what you're describing there is a pretty to have such a different perspective thrown on you, right? And I find that with it's just putting yourself in very foreign environments that are not typical or stereotypically what you've kind of programmed to be, right? Societally, that's you were raised subconsciously, consciously with all of these expectations around what it means to be a woman, to be a man. Now, in terms of just the debate around gender, and it's not even a debate for me, but just the language that we use and where that sits in terms of inclusivity. Was it something that challenged your masculinity? How does that show up? What do you do with that then, post what we would call in Australia the mothers group? Like it's for a long time, it's still called the mothers group. We're trying to move to parent groups, but she's struggling. But what did you do next?
Yeah, so I think if you reflect back, I've had numerous moments that I've done that. Firstly, my mental health struggles moved me slightly beyond the stoic, suppressed version of myself. Then, when you lose your mobility, your physical presence, your independence, your autonomy, like I did when I was ill, you suddenly realize that how you've been told all those things were valuable from such a young age, but actually, who were you as a person after you found that actually they were simply taken away from you? So I'd had some chances to start to try and explore the whole man that I could be, and in a hospital bed where you're lying there, you suddenly get space to do that. But even walking into that space where historically one of my kind of fellow stay at home dads was actually turned away for a vote on whether he'd be allowed to join the group.
Mm.
I felt quite cherished because I was welcomed by a group of the mothers who were very welcoming. Another group took a little bit of time to warm up. Another group were always a little bit more hesitant about a man coming into a space that was historically safe for women. And again, that would have been ultimately due to their own lived experience, given some of the stories that I then heard as I got to know them. But for me, it was fascinating to be able to come into a space and utilize that discomfort to listen. It widened my perspective, and all of a sudden, I could see other injustices out in society, and I didn't have an excuse not to start to interrogate them. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Mm. I'm built like that too.
You have a choice
Yeah, it is a choice.
around what you actually do. So it did, yeah, it did challenge my masculinity. It did make me reflect on again how rigid those gender norms are impacting women. That I had started to unpack some of the rigid gender norms that had impacted me as a man, and it got me curious about those parts of myself that historically I might have suppressed because they weren't traditionally masculine and as acceptable for me as a young black man to express. And there was real power in that, but also there was fear too.
Can only imagine. And I think there's a lot of conversation happening here around how we support our boys, you know, in terms of understanding. There's a lot of threats to just good humanity. And I think, you know, where the world is at the moment, I know that you are a UN Women Change Maker of the Year. I think it was 2023. I just came back from the United Nations and was at CSW 70 and in March in New York, and watching it's not even the backlash against DEI, but it's a complete threat to humanity is how I'm seeing it all over the world, and the oppression against lots of different groups, but women in particular, whether that's in conflict zones where they bear the brunt of a lot of what happens on the front line, or whether it's in organisations or everywhere in between. We're seeing a very, very coordinated effort to try and take us backwards. And I'm curious to know, because you're based in the UK, but you've obviously got really global kind of connections and insights like I do. What are you seeing out there? How do you respond to people that talk about backlash? Because I'm not sure that that's what I would call it personally, but how do you talk about that?
Yeah, no, it is fascinating, isn't it, Trina? Because obviously part of my work is to almost hold multiple truths at the same time and try and encourage other people to start to work on that less binary, one side, one truth type mindset that sadly is nice and simple in times that feel complex, but actually keeps people completely blinded and sheltered from the reality that we're facing as a species. I suppose how I kind of see it in my world is on one side, we're actively seeing rights that have been fought for and died for being stripped across the world. And there is no silver lining to that. There isn't really any way you can package it to be a positive thing. And it also makes me reflect that actually, sometimes, especially in places where we reside, we actually are starting to think those of us like, yourself and me, an actual realization that rights that people are taking for granted where we live are a lot more fragile than the general person on the street thinks they are.
Yeah.
So there is that wider piece around looking, as soon as you look global, you realize how fragile these rights are. And there is nothing good to come from humans being stripped of basic fundamental human rights.
Mhm.
However, if that's the only truth that are held, it would be very, very difficult sometimes to walk into some of the spaces that I do with men who think that DEI is a load of woke nonsense,
Yeah.
that it's taking away from them, and that actually they are the victims of this strangely inclusive world that is simply discriminatory towards me. Because obviously, my work is to quite often create spaces for them, very men, to express their feelings towards inclusion without judgment and sit in a place of curiosity till you can find an entry point. Because what's really interesting is while I might not have the same beliefs, be attached to similar ideologies as some of these people I sit in front of, historically the world has been full of people who have very different perspectives on things. And my job is so often to not judge them because they're expecting to be judged. In fact, the content they consume tells them they will be judged. But to actually try and create enough space to find some shared language, or to actually dig beyond the very fact that for many of them, they're actually not angry about inclusion or frustrated about equity or absolutely sick of diversity. For most of them, there is something going on in their own lives that they're simply not happy about, not able to express, limited in their ability to access support for a variety of different reasons. And quite often, it's trying to get to the root of actually what's going on for them. And you realize that actually, at the end of the day, lots of these individuals want to be heard, they want to be valued, they want things to be fair. What does DEI actually stand for?
Yeah.
For fairness,
Yeah.
for everyone to be valued, for everyone to be seen, for everyone to be heard. And it's almost trying to loop them back in to the very things that they are fighting against, to the very things that will solidify a system that continues to ensure that they will not access the very things that they're actually looking for. It can be quite a long jump for some of those individuals to actually think, but getting them to at least start to think about interrogating the systems that have got them to where they have got to, and to just become a bit more conscious around those beliefs that you've just shared with me, that you've heard yourself saying. When did you pick those up? Who shared those with you? Do you now just see all content around that in your algorithm? When was the last time you searched for something outside of that? have you been fed this to distract you from actually making some change in the world? So the systems are what they are, but we can sometimes use a system to actually get people to be curious about what the systems are doing to them. Does it always suddenly transform someone into a change maker overnight? No, Trina, because quite often many of these individuals lack the skills of making change. And that's where we see allyship coming in as a skill set of working across difference and the skill set of being able to make change. And once we've got them interested in a skill set that can be really valuable for the future because it's not getting any less uncertain or volatile, men quite like building skills as well. It becomes a conversation that's more around how they can gain rather than them feeling like they're losing something.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? Like, I think, and we have a lot of challenges in Australia, and I think, I always talk about from an, equitable design perspective, I talk about like designing for the minority and you're going to benefit the majority. And if we start with a racial lens, often we will pick up with a gender benefit at the same time. Interestingly, sidebar, but interestingly, every man I've met that does powerful work in this space that's in my network is a black man. And it's interesting to me that gender equity, and I'm curious to know, like, I could make an assumption around what the obvious kind of connection in is with that. But do you see that? Or is it just that that's the people that I'm attracted to in my network that are kind of because of the algorithm of the things I look for in terms of injustices around race and gender and everything in between? Because allyship is at the core of all of this, and we need that across lots of different spaces. So I'm curious to know how you come into that and what kind of allies you're seeing, because I'm sure some are not typical and we shouldn't generalize. And I'm curious to know who are the people that are wanting to build skills in allyship and what is it that you think kind of is the common denominator?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. If I think to those I know across, for example, the global north, who are working in this field, who are kind of delivering scale and impact, it's actually a really interestingly mixed group of men in terms of cultures, ethnicities, ages, perspectives. And it's been fascinating to see that diversity and try to understand what are the commonalities between us, because actually our different pathways, different journeys into this work are actually really powerful drivers of collaboration because we're able to create impact, shared impact in different ways. What's quite interesting within that though is that especially for those who do this work, who step out of, there's a good cohort who are in many ways in their 60s and they are to the back end of their careers who don't want to stop working but want to continue to deliver impact they probably started in their working life. And they are an interesting cohort because they've seen more cycles of change over time, some of those generational considerations. And actually, for me in my 40s, there's been massive shifts since I was younger. But for those who are in the 60s, they've seen additional cycles of this go through, seen workplaces change significantly, laws change. So what's really interesting is, for me, seeing that mix is it wholly representative of if you took the whole of the territories that we've got a lot of contact with? I would say there are still more people from minoritized backgrounds in terms of men who are engaged in this work because in many ways we are more likely to have been othered, to have been excluded, and to have a bit of an empathetic bridge towards what that exclusion feels like. And sometimes you don't want to be necessarily on the front lines of advocating for change for someone who's deeply aligned to your identity, because that just leaves you in a place where you become part of a group of people fighting for the rights of people who are like you, but also puts a lot of burden and accountability on your shoulders to change systems that you haven't created, aren't credited within, and very rarely have the actual tools to dismantle. So for me, it was much more around how can I think about the situation of people who are, from an identity perspective, different to me, but think about how I can look at the barriers that they face. And maybe I might have some of the keys to unlock some of those doors, or some of the tools to dismantle some of those barriers. that I've used in different ways and different kind of parts of my life and things that I've picked up or collectively come together with other people to build a bit of a toolkit to make change that doesn't necessarily rely on my own lived experience, but actually is able to make a difference to other people. And I do kind of feel that, masculinities in themselves kind of approach in a slightly different way when you took a racialized kind of intersectional approach to how it impacts me and men within my own community. In some ways, there's the hyper masculinity that does come with how we represent the fact we're sometimes seen as more of a threat and some of the things that we face as a group of people. But for me, Trina, it's always been about the curiosity beyond myself. What are other people going through? What difference can I make? If I'm honest, that's just humanity, right? We've been purposely individualized and fragmented, and the power is actually the togetherness and the exploration, the curiosity.
Oh, it so is. And it's why, like I've just really doubled down on my work in kind of human first leadership, human first organizations, like trying to bring humanity back into how we're showing up in all the places that we're showing up, because I feel like that disconnectedness is just blowing, like, everything out of the water. And I look at lots of cultures. Have always sought for the difference. And, when you talk about curiosity as your lens, that really resonates with me, because I'm like, I know about myself and my background and the people that look like me. I don't know much about other people who have had different lived experiences. And so I nerd out on learning about life through lived experience and conversations. And so I seek it out and have a thirst for it, which means that I seek it out a lot. So I'm always kind of quite proud, I guess, of the diversity in my network. But I think one of the things that you said there, though, around the tools in your toolbox to kind of drive change, I think, 50% of the world are men, and we need the men to be able to help, because it's not a women's problem. Gender equity is not a women's problem. And so I don't have the lens and perspective to know how to change behavior across, the men in all the spheres that I work in. But I need men with different perspectives to be able to help add to that conversation. And so it's the same with us getting more men into feminized workplaces, right? Like it's reversing it, like what your experience was with the mothers group. It's all of those spaces we need to look at. I'm curious about how you talk about allyship. So you've obviously started a whole organization, Male Allies UK, but you've also just done a national allyship summit. I'm curious to know how it went. Tell me everything about it. Gutted that I'm on the other side of the world and couldn't be there. Talk to me about kind of what led to that and what the vibe was.
Yeah, no, thank you, Trina. So for me, I've got an interesting relationship with the word. So for me, when I first came across it 11 years ago now, when researching the difference that I could potentially make, when I first came across it in some academic studies, I'll be honest, I did not like the word.
Allyship?
Yeah, it brought up associations that felt very combative, very kind of good versus bad, very binary, and very much not about building bridges, but more like blowing up bridges. That's how I kind of perceived it from a terminology perspective. And reflecting on why, it's because there's so much around the First and the Second World War in British education, the Allied forces, the alliance, the allies coming to support each other. And it's used heavily in that militaristic context. So I looked at and had that word through my framing and was like, no, 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 they definitely don't like that kind of terminology because it simply sounds very, very fighty.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm not going to take that word forward. I'm sure there's a better way to describe this. But me being a curious 7-year-old child went to actually look, okay, take your own assumptions asidely. Where did the word actually come from? Now, the origin and the root of the word allyship comes from the Old French word allier. And allier means to combine, to unite, and to bring things together. And I looked at that and I thought, that solidarity, that unity, that's the ancient concept. And it's just lost its meaning, at least to me anyway. So, how can I bring the ancient meaning into an increasingly polarized and divided modern world? So, that became the mission. So, that's how I kind of obviously see it in like a broader sense. But we've kind of taken it and thought, obviously, it's very easy for words to be weaponized nowadays. And we could have a whole episode about why do words get weaponized? Who gets to weaponize words? Who gets to reclaim words? Do we even need to spend less time talking about which words we use and more time about the actual impact of the actions that we take? Have words become a distraction? I think there's a lot we could say about that. But we obviously do a lot of work around allyship being a fundamental skill set. And again, part of that is because with the audiences that we work with and the people we connect with and getting feedback from multiple different angles on this, what we found is that historically it's been used in an identity context. This person is an ally, this person is not an ally. That's very binary by its nature. It can lead to performativity, i.e., the badge, the certificate, I'm an ally now, but no consistent everyday behaviors to actually make a difference. It can be used to give people a nice performative veneer, but then they don't do any systemic change. And it can sometimes fit into the world's gamification systems of get the title, game complete, now just carry on with my own life. And it sometimes can lead people to want to behave in ways that they want to protect the title, which actually are reductive and harmful to people because I'm trying to keep looking like an ally. I'm not actually doing the work. So I didn't particularly like the identity framing of it because it also places accountability on those who are entitled so and takes accountability off those who are not. And actually, accountability needs to be shared. And we remove it away from the ideology lens as well in some ways, because the idea that you believe it or you don't, again, is an unhelpful binary that people fall into. Like, if I don't believe in gender equality, I can't be an ally. And the truth is, there is an aspect of you needing to interrogate your beliefs and have a set of values to build these skills in a way that isn't replaying patriarchal narratives. But if we start there, it just means it never will. So actually, looking at it as a skill set feels more approachable to populations of people who want to do better, want to get better, want to make a difference, but also want to build skills that will help them navigate the increasingly polarized, divided, volatile, uncertain, brittle world we live in. And when it comes back to it, Trina, lots of people are focused on technological skills. How do I prompt AI? Blah, 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 blah. What skills are going to be incredibly useful and rare when everyone's gone off and learned how to prompt AI and then they start you start working with AI agents. You're not prompting them anymore, you're managing them. What skills are going to be useful when everyone's got distracted? Oh, those deep people skills of working across difference, of being able to listen effectively, be able to ask appreciative questions. Oh, so really, it makes sense.
Does make sense. And I think there's so much work that we're doing around kind of the human skills space and kind of doubling down on that. And, I'm running an event in a couple of weeks and people are like, oh, you're going to have AI panels, AI to sit and no, 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 I will not. There are plenty of conferences that you can go to and, absorb all the AI that you want. What I'm interested to sit there is what you're just talking about is how are the tools that we might be using being weaponized, or how are they helping us with complacency and not kind of showing up and hiding behind things? So it was the AI that, you know, detonated that horrific bomb that like, I'm sorry, no, there's a lot of world events where AI is the dog ate my homework. And it's just, it's ridiculous. But I think that what you're talking about with allyship being skill set and with kind of that being fundamental to where we are, I think that's going to become just so critical because we do have generations coming through super differently to how I did as a kid, right? In my late 40s, nearly 50. So no phones, no documentation of my developmental years, thankfully, as an 18 to 21-year-old. Thank God there were no phones. That was the British Encyclopedia was where I did my homework to do my assignments for uni. Like, it's information, good or bad, at our fingertips, the device stuff. What are your thoughts on where we are with the next gen? And what does it mean for boys, I guess, would be where I lead. And what are you seeing just generally, though, around our next generation and what might look different? What's encouraging you would be something that I'd be keen to lean in on. What's encouraging you about the next gen, and where do you think we need to put more effort to support them?
Yeah, that's a massive question, Trina.
You're welcome.
So, so I think just to kind of finish off the last question that I didn't answer, the summit was really focused around how we move from division to dialogue,
Mm.
because that division is intentionally being sown. And obviously, one of the ways that division is intentionally sown is through the polarization engines of technology. It's very intentional, very strategic, and very coordinated to fragment us apart because, well, you can manipulate individuals when you put them into groups who have massive amounts of confirmation bias and can be shuffled around, but never truly bonded together to be able to actually fight back or challenge. And obviously, the technology now and some of the stuff that we're looking at around, our recent research project was around boys and AI companions and chatbots. And yeah, a lot of our work can look at the impact of things that are built that are harmful by design, not safe by design, and how young people have access to things that are harmful by design. Whereas a typical toy on the shop shelf goes through all sorts of safety regulations. You're not allowed to get into the driver's seat of a car and start driving around without a whole range of different checkpoints and learnings and lessons. Certain things that are designed in a fundamentally harmful way are just allowed straight into the hands of people without any kind of interrogation. So I've got obviously lots of different perspectives on this. On one side, from spending a lot of time with young people, I actually do come out more hopeful than I go into these conversations. And that's quite fascinating in the current climate, given so many of the headlines. Because if there is one thing, young people are actually have had to become more discerning and had to start practicing critical thinking because of the sheer amount of misinformation that they're being bombarded with. And while the subtleness of it still impacts all of them, for some of the more overt stuff, they are becoming more and more questioning around, is this going to help me? More and more young people are starting to interrogate why these things are so prevalent in our lives. And it's fascinating because we talk about like smartphone free childhood, whereas some of the kids are like, maybe we need a smartphone free adulthood because we got our parents getting manipulated by bots on Facebook. Like, I'm aware of that. But my parents are the ones who have the lower levels of digital literacy and really, really not considering the impact and what they're role modeling to me. But also, one thing, Trina, is there are a lot of young people who are now saying, look, I don't want a phone and I don't want social media. And while the bans that have come in your side and are due to come in on our side, I have two perspectives on that as well. Like, bans are a helpful signal, but really we shouldn't be banning it. We should be getting the organizations to build safe products
Mm.
because they're still harming adults and children will find ways to jailbreak these things. They will find their ways around. They will end up in different, less regulated places of the internet. And the youth services, both in Oz and here, are not funded the way that they have been historically. And the offline on ramp is not there. But that means that young people are becoming more outspoken about how they're not happy about being manipulated about technology. They are not happy about AI because they see it as a threat, even though they're also worried that if they don't start using it, they might miss an opportunity. But there are lots of young people who feel the world is fundamentally unfair and are actually doing something about it. So I've had the pleasure of meeting groups of young people who are running local climate action groups, groups of young people who set out diversity forums in the schools, young people who've decided to actually utilize AI with really positive, kind of human orientated use cases to tackle challenges in sustainability of humans, of planet, of water. So I'm actually meeting young people who are doing things and let's be honest, Trina. Yes, there is no camera reel or social media of our childhoods, and I'm bloody glad, because jumping over hedges, being drunk and falling over, and all those things that I did at 15, 16, I am very glad they are not attributed somewhere on the internet. And young people tell me that they don't drink, and there's certain things they don't do just in case they end up on the internet the day after. It has modified behaviour in strange ways, where some young people take less risks because of the surveillance world around them. But at the end of the day, some of the things I obviously kind of end up in conversations with around young people and pornography, young people and synthetic romance and attachment, normalization of abuse, coercion just being a standard because you've been tracked your whole life, and even to a point where people with criminal intent are now using children's photos to create things and blackmail people. I obviously live sometimes on the darker part of this work, and online harms are quite significant. I do believe that many of the young people today who are now pushing back will be better adults for pushing back. I think we sometimes underestimate just how sick and tired of the world young people are. But obviously, what we're finding is some are deciding to go and try and change it. Some young people just feel like they want to burn the whole world down and start again. It's so important for us to bring their voices in. And it's just that mindfulness that my work with the boys is to hold the space of how they've been conditioned by society to that point, and to help them realize that that has potentially harmed them, suppressed the whole boy that they could explore being, could potentially mean that they don't get to become the whole man that they could potentially be, because they're going to be told you can't do this, you can't be like this, this isn't what manhood is. And you are going to have lots of voices shouting to you online that you need to be rich, ripped, and relentless. And that's the only way to be a man.
Yeah.
And to identify that as harmful, but also to hold enough safety there to get them to realize that their actions might well harm other people. And they need to obviously consider the impact of their actions, especially when it comes towards women and girls. And actually, that socialization means that you might actually cause harm, and you have to have some accountability for it because there are consequences, and getting them to explore that. But you need to do this also, you need to hold both of those spaces for them at the same time, because otherwise it becomes either painting boys as victims, which they are, but also they can potentially cause harm. Or if you focus just on the harm, boys feel like they are being blamed for a system that has been upheld by thousands of adults around them. And actually, they're not even a man yet themselves.
Yeah. And that's the cycle where we've just got so much work to do. We've got so many systemic failures in terms of where we are, in terms of family units, support structures, care structures, like you spoke about earlier. It used to be that, we're all scared for the future of our girls, but there's a lot of boy mamas in my world that are just petrified around the messages. So that's good. All parents are alarmed now. So that's good. That leveled the playing field. But I think even when I was at the UN, you were talking about online harm, and, you know, it was the youngest people that were the most inspiring. I'm not sure what I expected when I was going to CSW in terms of being in, it's such a phenomenal kind of once in a lifetime opportunity to be in the spaces where big decisions get made. But it was the young people, not the politicians, that told you how good everything was, but it was the young people that were talking about the deep fake pornography, or as the young people that were like seeing unfairness, seeing atrocities, and then doing really awesome, bold, cool things, generationally relevant in terms of being an intervention closest to the people that needed it. There's no point in me defining a way of kind of solving a problem that I'm so far removed from that I wouldn't know how to solve that problem if it's safe to save myself. And I think it's nothing short of inspiring. And I think you're right. I don't think young people get enough credit. And interestingly, in the work I do, I feel like that's flowing into workplaces as well. So I feel like community-wise, that's one thing. But now I'm also seeing those voices lost in terms of like younger generation in our workplaces. We've got such an intergenerational composition now in terms of who works for us. And we've got perceived sense of entitlement. We've got just this judgment, right? Not curiosity. And so voices are hard. And I think that's our role as allies, right? To be able to create the spaces for the voices to shine, create the spaces for the people that are not naturally invited into spaces to be there. Are you seeing much change across workplaces in regard to some of this work? Has anything surprised you lately?
Yeah, so again, the intergenerational stuff is really important because again, it is riddled with assumptions. If you take cohorts of generations, you actually find that there's a lot of difference in those cohorts. And if you actually look someone's life stage gives a lot more commonality than actual generation. And it's now interesting because we've got people who are becoming mothers for the first time in their 40s and people who are becoming mothers for the first times in their 20s, both kind of interacting. And even in my kind of baby and toddler group, there was like a 25-year age gap between just mothers. That's before we brought grandmothers into the conversation. There's a grandmother who was younger than one of the mothers. So life stage quite often determines more than your actual generation. So trying to help people to drop some of those generational stereotypes which don't ring true is a starting point. But obviously, we're in a world where the world of work has changed, and people's perspectives of what ways of working are acceptable and what are not are still stuck in this old hierarchical system. And we are still in a place where, if you look at the language of business, kind of hierarchy, firm, company, battlefield, structures, it's all militaristic. It's all been co-opted from the military. All the leadership books are very based around that. We're still operating on an old workplace system. Still, people talking about 9 to 5s that have been part of the industrial revolution way of working for the past 100 and odd years. And people feel strangely resistant to, so much has changed. People let this technology just run loose and evolve itself. But workplace structure and the way things work around here, oh, I can't change that. Oh no. And it's fascinating because young people are coming into workplaces and saying, ultimately, I'm going to do the outputs that I'm expected to do. I'm going to create some boundaries. And it's more often how that's communicated rather than how it's actually done. Sometimes it can be communicated in a way that isn't maybe the most respectful. But the problem is, it might take one or two people to do that. And then all of a sudden, people are generalizing a whole cohort of people from that. Because there are also a group of young people who are like, they've been bombarded by hustle, hustle more. And they will be the first one into the office and the last one to leave. There's massive polarity in the younger generation in terms of working styles, quite often based on the type of content they've been fed and the examples they have around them. But for me, the biggest thing is getting those intergenerational conversations because, especially since the pandemic, there's been less of that organic time for you to actually find out a bit about each other's lives, a bit about the story of how you got to where you've got to, a little bit of the things of how things have actually changed. And that means other things can change as well. And there's a really interesting kind of, so a good friend of mine, she had her daughter who was 17 go work in the local pub as one of her first jobs over the summer. And she said it fundamentally changed my daughter because all of a sudden she was stood there in the pub serving an 80-year-old who comes in every day, a 60-year-old couple who come in to eat most days. And she got to speak to them, get to know them. Did she agree with everything they said? No. Did he say a few things where she felt like, oh my God, what the hell is that? Yes. But she also got to realize they're actual people. And there was stories that sat behind the way that they were. And she had just had a very different perspective on the interesting aspect of finding out what other people are like across generations. And we just need, again, comes back down to that curiosity, Trina. There is a aspect of intergenerational allyship that is threaded into our work. Because when you don't have that proximity, you can look at the stats, it's probably the same in Australia, but mixing between generations, especially after the pandemic, outside of your own family, is less than ever. And that's why we're really passionate about an ability to actually, for people to actually come together It might be across a shared interest. It might be across a team in a workplace. It might be organically created as a space. But ultimately, to spend time with people of different ages where listening is as important as talking, and just to be able to actually explore and realize that some of the very assumptions that you hold are so often not true, and you meet more counter stereotypes than you sometimes do stereotypes.
What do you think organisations should do to improve allyship within their organisation?
Well, it's a really good question, Trina, because obviously it's a question that I'm having to deal with on a daily basis. I've got lots of perspectives and not much time.
Yeah.
So I think, firstly, we see allyship in three ways. There's allyship on an individual level, allyship from a leadership level, and allyship from an organizational level. And the truth is, everyone has a level of accountability for building these skills and turning up and having those micro moments of being a bit more inclusive towards other people. That's in everyone's gift. And if everyone did that in a workplace, the ripples would be significant.
Ripples.
Yeah, you got the leadership aspect where ultimately leaders do role model and infer permission to other people. Leaders do have more access to systems and structures where they can start to pull those levers that make change, looking at gender gaps and how they can close them through policy, through structures, through intervention. And obviously there's an organizational lens to this where organizations have, policies, processes, systems that can be changed. But a big thing is an organization created a culture where it's actually safe enough for the individuals to use these skills and the leaders to role model things without being punished?
Mm.
So there's a very kind of reciprocal nature to it. It's important that organizations really work to define allyship as a skill that people should be building, because any skill that an organization suggests that people should work on, probably not people do, because the business has suggested it might help me to navigate that difficult client, to manage that person on my team. It might even help me to have those really frustrating conversations with that member of my family who we don't have the same political beliefs. But I can tolerate them just for Christmas.
I think that's the key, isn't it? The same skills that we need as humans that's going to help us with humanity, it's going to help us in our families, communities, and our workplaces. Lee Chambers, thank you so much for allyship being your action superhero space, because we need more people who can help all of us to be better allies. So thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you for the space.
Thanks for spending time with me. If this conversation challenged you, clarified something, or simply reminded you that you're not the only one holding the tension between people and performance, then it's done exactly what it was meant to. This work isn't easy, but it is necessary. HR has a new future, and it leads with heart. So if you found value here, subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Share this episode with someone who also believes that work can be better. And if you want to go deeper, you can explore the Heartwork model, the programs, and the growing community of HR leaders at trinasunday.com. Because when HR leads with clarity, courage, and compassion, it doesn't just change workplaces, it changes lives. Until next time, keep asking better questions, keep backing your voice, and keep putting humanity at the center of performance. Let's keep heart at work.